May 1945. The guns fall silent across Europe. And for a brief moment, the world exhales. But what Allied soldiers found when they crossed the wire, that was not relief. That was something else entirely. Something that did not have a name yet. Piles of the dead. Gas chambers still carrying the residue of what had been done inside them. And thousands of survivors so reduced, so hollowed out, that soldiers stood frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. The camps were real. The scale was real. And now, with the war over, someone had to decide, what do you do with places like this? Do you burn them? Preserve them? Pretend they never existed? If you've ever asked yourself how history chooses what to remember, and what to bury, drop your thoughts below. The answer here is more complicated than most people realize. The Soviets arrived first. On the 23rd of July, 1944, Red Army units reached Majdanek near Lublin. The Germans had not expected them so soon. The gas chambers were still standing. The evidence was intact. 6 months later, January 27, 1945, Soviet forces liberated Auschwitz. By then, the SS had already evacuated most prisoners westward on death marches. Around 7,000 survivors remained, most too sick to walk. The Soviets found warehouses, shoes, suitcases, eyeglasses, over 7,000 kilograms of human hair, bagged, labeled, ready for shipment. I don't know how to explain what it does to a man, seeing that. Not the bodies. The belongings. Because the bodies, you tell yourself, war. You've seen war. But the hair, sorted and packed like a commodity, that's when something breaks. Something that doesn't come back. That spring, American forces reached Buchenwald, April 11th, finding over 21,000 prisoners still alive. 4 days later, the British entered Bergen-Belsen. 60,000 starving, critically ill prisoners packed into barracks stripped of water and food. Thousands of unburied bodies across the grounds. Typhus moving through the population like a second sentence. On April 29, Americans reached Dachau. Outside the gates, a train of freight cars. Each one filled with the dead. Inside, 30,000 survivors waited. General Eisenhower ordered the atrocities documented in full. He understood something in that moment that others would take decades to learn, that people would one day try to deny this had ever happened. That instinct, to record, to preserve, to make the evidence undeniable, may be one of the most consequential decisions of the entire post-war period. What Eisenhower ordered in those first days shaped how the world would eventually reckon with what had been done. Liberation did not mean resolution. Many survivors were too weak to receive solid food. In Bergen-Belsen alone, over 13,000 people perished in the weeks following liberation, from disease, from starvation's long aftermath. The British made a devastating but necessary call. The barracks were so contaminated with typhus that flamethrowers and bulldozers were ordered in. The original camp buildings were burned to the ground. Survivors relocated. The structures, gone. Before retreating, the SS had attempted to erase what they could. At Auschwitz, the crematoria were blown up. Documents burned. The Operation Reinhard camps, Treblinka, Sobibor, Bełżec, had been systematically dismantled as early as 1943. Ground plowed over. Trees planted. At Treblinka, a farmhouse was constructed on the site where nearly 900,000 people had been murdered. Nearly 1.7 million people killed across those 3 camps. And the physical evidence, deliberately erased. The question of what gets remembered, and what gets paved over, was already being answered. In real time. Most people assumed these places were immediately turned into memorials. They weren't. The real story of what happened to the camps is darker, stranger, and far more human than that. Some sites were repurposed almost immediately. With approximately 8 million displaced persons across post-war Europe, former camp infrastructure became one of the only available options. Bergen-Belsen became one of the largest Jewish displaced persons camps in Germany, operating until September 1950. At its peak, over 11,000 residents. Schools opened. Newspapers ran. Democratic elections were held. The birth rate inside that camp, among the highest recorded anywhere in the world. Survivors rebuilding what had been taken. You think about that sometimes. Same ground. Same wire fence, maybe. And inside, children being born. People voting. People choosing. It doesn't reconcile easily in the mind. But it happened. At Dachau, the Allies used the facility to imprison accused war criminals and SS members. Then, as the refugee crisis deepened, roughly 2,000 ethnic Germans expelled from Czechoslovakia settled there. That settlement remained until the mid-1960s. In the Soviet occupation zone, the trajectory was different. Darker. Sachsenhausen became Soviet Special Camp No. 7. Between 1945 and 1950, approximately 60,000 people were imprisoned there, former Nazi functionaries alongside political dissidents, individuals convicted after forced confessions. Over 12,000 died from hunger and disease. The camps were sealed. They were called, quietly, the silence camps. Buchenwald followed the same path. 28,000 imprisoned. 7,000 dead. And the existence of these Soviet-era camps was hidden entirely from public knowledge until German reunification in 1990, when mass graves were opened and the full picture finally emerged. The transformation of these sites into memorials did not happen overnight. It happened unevenly, reluctantly, and often only because survivors refused to let the silence hold. Poland moved first. On June 14, 1947, the first exhibition opened at Auschwitz, organized by former prisoners. 50,000 people attended. The following month, the Polish Parliament formally established the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum. In 1979, UNESCO designated it a World Heritage Site. Germany moved slower. East Germany opened memorials at Buchenwald in 1958, Sachsenhausen in 1961, but framed them as sites of anti-fascist resistance, deliberately downplaying the specific persecution of Jewish, Roma, and other targeted communities. The Soviet-era camp history was suppressed entirely. In West Germany, the Dachau Memorial opened in 1965, driven largely by the survivors themselves. The original barracks had deteriorated beyond preservation. 2 were reconstructed. The remaining 30 are marked only by low concrete outlines filled with gravel. After German reunification, a reckoning began. Soviet-era narratives were revised. New exhibitions documented what had been hidden. Mass graves were excavated. These sites now carry layered history, bearing witness to both Nazi crimes and Soviet repression. What began as a single atrocity became, in some places, a palimpsest. Horror written over horror. At the Operation Reinhard sites, formal memorials came late. Treblinka's monument was not erected until the 1960s. A proper memorial at Bełżec, where approximately 435,000 people were killed, was not completed until 2004. Across Germany and Austria, hundreds of subcamps simply disappeared. Built near factories, dismantled after the war, absorbed into expanding towns. Local communities, in many cases, preferred to move on. To not look. That's the thing that gets me. Not the ones who tried to erase it. The ones who just let it fade. Quietly. Without a decision. That kind of forgetting takes effort too. Just a different kind. What survives today is a fraction of the vast system the Nazis constructed. More than 44,000 camps, ghettos, and incarceration sites once existed across occupied Europe. Only a handful are preserved. At Treblinka and Sobibor, recent archaeological work using ground-penetrating radar has uncovered the foundations of gas chambers and personal belongings still buried beneath quiet fields. Physical evidence emerging decades later from ground the killers believed they had erased forever. What the post-war world chose to do with these places, burn them, reuse them, memorialize them, hide them, tells us as much about humanity as the atrocities themselves. Memory is not automatic. It requires a decision. Sometimes it requires a fight. What remains, whether preserved behind glass or buried beneath grass, stands as a reminder that systematic attempts to erase history are never fully successful. and that the world's response to these places, slow and imperfect as it was, continues to shape how every generation since has understood the darkest chapter of the 20th century.